Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Kroll, and today I'm going to talk with you about the relativity of sexual consent. Now, consent means, or is supposed to mean, she has given her approval for something that the man proposed. But consent should not be necessary if she herself has told the man that she wants to have sex with him, right, before he asks, or without telling him verbally if she indicates with her body that she wants to have sex with him by initiating it and starting to have sex with him. That physical communication counts as consent. But now, even if she has given the man her consent, either verbally or non-verbally, women now often reserve the right to rescind consent after the sex act has taken place. So the problem with consent from women is that it is relative. And this is due to two factors. One, most women do not know what they want or how to communicate about it, especially when it comes to sex, but even when it doesn't, just about anything. Women often do not know what they want in life, and their communication skills are very poor. And then two, though a woman may pass the legal age of consent physically, that doesn't mean that she is actually past it mentally. So a woman can age physically without aging mentally, understand? And if either of these two things is the case, which they usually are, a woman may be too confused about her sexuality to be able to give conscientious consent. Allow me to explain this further with some real life situations. Once when I was younger, there was this hot girl that wanted to fuck me. And when I asked her how old she was, she said she was 15, but that she liked older guys because I was older than that. And she was already sexually experienced with them and felt she was mature enough to make those decisions, and basically made a good case for me to try to persuade me to be okay with the fact that she was under the age of consent and I was over it. Now, that was long ago. At that time, I myself was still quite young, but older than her and over the age of consent. I was 23. So while I wasn't myself used to being thought of as an older guy, and my teenage, years and high school years weren't that far away and were still fresh in mind, and while, if I'm being honest, her seductive ploy was a bit tempting, but the age of consent in my state at that time was 17, and I wasn't going to let myself be seduced by jailbait and have that hanging over my head. So to reassure myself that I was making the right decision to resist her seduction, I told my group of friends at the time, knowing they'd all basically reassure me of my own sentiments, that, yeah, that sucks, but what are you going to do? One friend in particular was in his 30s at that time, probably about how old I am now, and he said, just because she wants to fuck you and it would be consensual, it doesn't matter. The law exists because a teenage girl doesn't know what she really wants. So even though she seemed to know what she wanted, thought she knew what she wanted, the reason why this age of consent law is a thing is because people simply aren't conscious enough to make those kinds of decisions until they reach a certain age. That's why you shouldn't be having sex or doing drugs or voting, or making changes to your body until you are fully adult. And we're made to believe that that age is whatever age your state or country says it is. But it is more relative than that, all right? So for instance, later I met a 17-year-old who had reached the age of consent and seemed like she wanted to fuck as well. But when she came over and we started to get into it and, make out a little bit, she started acting unsure, nervous, and, a little bit neurotic, or maybe even more than a little bit. So I simply showed her out. She obviously wasn't really fully into it. Her heart wasn't in it. And even though she was at the legal age of consent, I just didn't feel as though I could accept her consent. Being young and immature and potentially not knowing what she really wanted and being unable to make a conscious decision seemed to still be an issue here. Now, it wasn't just because she was young and immature in this case. There was also probably a mental health issue, which is why I said she was behaving a bit neurotically. But that can occur in women of any age, and cloud anyone's judgment, regardless of if they're younger or older. Now, even later on, when I became a nightclub promoter, there was this hot stripper at an event who gave my boss, the manager of my promo company, a lap dance. Later, her and I became friends, and she told me she wanted to fuck him and asked me to find out for her if he was interested. A sign right there that though she could communicate with her body about her sexuality and sexual interest in him, which she did through giving him a lap dance, she was not psychologically mature enough to do so with her words. And, I tried to get her to do it, and she was just too shy and insecure and probably just didn't have the communication ability to, talk about these things. So I ended up bringing it up to him and mentioning it and asking him if he wanted to fuck her, and he said no, to my surprise, because she was hot, so it was surprising. So I asked, why not? Don't you think she's hot? And him and another promoter in the group who was also very popular with women both laughed and both said dude, that would be like fucking a retard. You can't fuck a retard. They both said it in, slightly different words. And that really got me thinking that, if a woman is not mentally mature enough or intelligent enough or mentally healthy enough, she really can't consent like an adult is supposed to be able to, right? And trying to have sex with such a woman is a very bad idea. And this girl came to almost every one of our nightclub events, and her and I, like I said, we became friends. And it turned out to be correct what these guys had said, that she was in fact quite retarded. And I also found out she was quite mentally unhealthy. Her sister had died recently and she had become a drug addict. So she was very unwell. And did I mention retarded? She was the kind of person who was an adult, about 22, 23 years old, but she acted like a child, like a teenager at best. All she did was party. I mean, her job as a stripper was basically to party and be sexual and dance around sexually while getting drunk, but she couldn't have an adult conversation, not just an intelligent or intellectual conversation, but she couldn't even answer basic questions. It was like there was nothing going on inside, but she was hot, right? So she was successful as a stripper. And like I said, she kept coming to our events. We were always talking because she was always there. Trying to seduce someone, and one night she tried to seduce me, almost successfully. And next thing I knew, I'm doing coke off her tits, and this leads immediately to her trying to get me into a threesome with her and another dude, which I tried to do in such a manner that wouldn't be, bisexual, because I'm not, I'm just like, hey, let me just try to fuck her, and not have any interaction with the guy, but it didn't work out. Just having him there was extremely uncomfortable and unarousing to me. I couldn't get it up, but she's just getting all into it and all excited. And she starts fucking smacking at me, striking me, and almost tearing out my nipple ring twice with her bracelet. So before I could even get a chance to fuck the girl, she was like sexually assaulting me. And the pain in my nipple was like so intense and severe and like such a turn off, especially the second time it was in the same nipple. I got so turned off and I'm just like, you two fuck. I'm out of here, and I went home. I walked like 2-3 blocks, just like going like, Mike said not to fuck the retard. You can't fuck the retard. Shouldn't have tried to fuck the retard. No, why did I try to fuck the retard? I let myself get all caught up in the moment. I got seduced by her fucking dancing and her tits and the coke, and she tried to get me to fuck her and another dude, and then almost tore my nipple ring out. I knew she was a crazy bitch. I shouldn't have fucking done it. So I was shown yet another reason why, even if a woman is of age, that doesn't mean she is mature enough or right enough in the head to have sex with and be able to do things such as communicate about and negotiate consent, even with things that are so important as hitting another person, which is sexual assault without consent, something that I went through and feminists don't care about because I'm a man. If I talk about that, I just get laughed at and told to man up. That's not really sexual assault because you're a man, so you should have wanted and enjoyed it, So that right there is another way in which consent is relative, and that, my consent as a man doesn't seem to count, but more on that later. Now, you might be thinking, well, this just means you have to go for women who are much older than the age of consent. Not just over it by a few years or 5 years or so. But no, because it is relative, that is why the legal age is different in different places. So for instance, when I lived in Mexico, the age of consent there was 13. And I fucked lots of girls much younger than myself and much younger than most women I was hooking up with in America, but none who were under the age of consent where I was from, because that just felt weird to me, right? So the age of consent where I was from was 17 or 18. It had been both at different times. So that to me was what I was programmed with thinking was okay as the age of consent, right? So even when I would go other places where the age of consent was different, to me, it didn't make sense. It just seemed weird. Now, one of the girls I fucked in Mexico was a hot young schoolgirl that I met on the boardwalk on the beach. And she was 18, but yet she was still in high school. And when I told someone from back home that I was fucking a teenage schoolgirl, he told me that I should consider her off limits. I said, well, she's 18. He said, well, because she's still in high school, she should still be considered off limits. But her age is 18, which is, 1 year older than the age of consent from back home. And it's also 5 years older than the age of consent here. So again, it just shows how relative the ability for a woman to consent is. And there's no real good standards or markers for it. Now, this girl, interestingly enough, was also a lesbian. But she had experimented sexually with a guy once before. And this is because in that culture, being gay was taboo. All right, it was a Catholic culture. and it is very old-fashioned, okay? So there were a serious lack of options for a homosexual woman there, as well as a lot of cultural pushback. And she had experimented with a guy before me because her family had found out about her lesbian inclinations and urged her to try to wash the gay away by taking a nice male friend of hers as a boyfriend and experimenting with him sexually, which is what she did. And it didn't work out between them sexually because she's a lesbian. And, you know, even if she was going to have good sex with a guy, that wasn't the type of guy for her. So I made her a simple offer. I told her I could fulfill your sexual needs just as good as a female because I'm a male sex educator. I'm a bit in touch with my feminine side, and, you know, I'm just good at this stuff. I'll make sure I'm only doing things that you want and give you pleasure, but also I'm constantly picking up girls on the beach and such, just like I did with you. And so I could actually help you pick up girls and find dates, and, you know, we could even have threesomes together. And imagine how beautiful it would be for you to be laying there on the bed with another girl, holding each other and making out and touching each other while I give you both vaginal massages and make you both come together. So basically, you know, like The Godfather, I'd made her an offer she couldn't refuse. So even though she was a lesbian, because I could meet her needs in lieu of her not having, you know, them met at the time, she was very into it. She was able to give mature consent, even though she was a female and it didn't fit with her sexual orientation to give it to me as a male, just because she did in fact want it. You know, I knew that I was basically just there to fulfill a sexual need of hers. And I found it interesting that even though she was very young, at the age of 18, because she had been on a journey as a homosexual and dealing with cultural shame and, you know, trying to find herself through this taboo and this shame and the guilt of her family and religion, you know, she had to explore her sexuality a lot more. She had sexual issues, socio-political issues to overcome. So she was more sexually mature than any other girls of her age. And even though I didn't speak good Spanish and there was a language barrier, because of that and her willingness and her want to engage in a, you know, sexual negotiation with me and fulfilling sexual encounters, she was able to communicate with me about consent better than many women I met in America who spoke English as their native language, and there was no communication barrier with. And they were older than her, and they were heterosexual, and they wanted to have sex with me not just because it was a form of, you know, masturbation, but because they were attracted to me and such. But then they couldn't communicate very well about consent. Yet with this girl, you know, I made a proposition, we engaged in negotiations, we navigated it, and we developed a sexual relationship that was very fulfilling to both of our needs and went on for quite some time. So even though I wasn't her type, she wasn't really attracted to me because, you know, she wasn't even heterosexual. And neither one of us was like trying to fall in love or anything like that. And we were treating it, I guess, kind of more like a business negotiation or transaction, which is taboo in America, where they say you're supposed to follow your heart when you do these things, which is probably why people don't talk about consent very often here, because it takes away from that moment in the, you know, the passion and romance of it. But we treated this more like a business negotiation and formed a functional sexual partnership that worked really well for both of us. But now later on in my study of psychology, I would learn that the human brain actually doesn't fully mature until the age of 25 or 30. And that just becoming fertile and having libido now doesn't make a woman sexually mature. That because of the slow rate of development of the human brain, many women take longer to reach a sexual age of maturity where they actually know what they want and, you know, enough that they're able to talk about it and ask for it and consent to it. And while this may happen faster for some women, you know, like the aforementioned girl who had been on a very serious sexual journey of discovery, many women are the opposite in that they do not go on a sexual journey of discovery, and thus they don't sexually develop. And that can go on for some time. So once when online dating was still a great way to meet women, and I was 28 or 29 years old, I met a 42-year-old heart surgeon. And I seemed to hit it off with her at first. She was beautiful, especially for her age. She was successful, which I took as a sign of intelligence and maturity and good character. Right? Wrong. She was actually just getting out of a divorce, and she had gotten married and pregnant at a young age with her high school sweetheart, who she had been with since then at the age of 17. They separated when she was 40, and the divorce took about 2 years, and so she was just now beginning to move on and start dating for the first time in her life. All right. She had never been with another man in her life sexually, and she had never dated. She had married her first love interest ever. So she spent her life in a sexual isolation and a certain social isolation since she never experienced dating before. So her brain never developed in certain ways that a woman's does when it has the social and sexual experience of dating as part of, your development. Now, she mentioned wanting to see a movie. So I scheduled a date with her for the upcoming Friday, which is 4 to 5 days away. That was like Monday or something. So it gave us enough time to, find a free block that we could schedule a date for, and then I rented the movie. When the time of the date came, she flaked on me. Something that is typical of women who are young and unsure of what they really want, and, basically shouldn't be bothered with because they're going to be flaky. That's something you would just assume of them. That's why a lot of men, as they get older, they don't want to date younger girls, even though they are more attractive, because you set dates with them and they flake on a percentage of them, sometimes a large percentage. They're just flaky people. And a lot of men who are, in a more serious place in their life don't want to deal with that. But this was happening now from a woman who is in a serious place in her life, a more serious place than me. Someone who's much more established in the world than I am, at a much higher professional level. Yet she flakes on me saying she had just realized that she shouldn't be coming over to my apartment when we first meet. I was like, well, you planned this date with me some time ago at the beginning of the week, and you didn't have a problem with it then or, all week until now. It took all week to realize it would be a problem and are only realizing it now that it is time, and I've already rented the movie and set aside this block of time for you. I grabbed this bottle of wine and food and everything. And she just started talking about how busy she is, alluding to the fact that she is either too busy to have even had time to stop and think, who doesn't have time to stop and think about what they are making plans to do? Or perhaps that in reality, she double booked me, or there's some sort of scheduling conflict. Or perhaps she realized that coming over to watch a movie wasn't a good enough first date offer for a busy surgeon who's in her early 40s. Either way, it didn't matter. As soon as she canceled on me, I just started getting ready to go out to do what I always do on Friday nights whenever I don't have a date, which is to, go out and pick up girls to get one. So I told her I was sorry it wasn't going to work out, and it was nice meeting her. And she then started trying to get me to reschedule with her, which I declined. I said, it's obvious to me that it's not going to work out because, she obviously to me wasn't a responsible, mature enough adult to be able to consent, and probably didn't really even know what she wanted sexually with another man because she, had never explored such things, even as a 42-year-old woman who has been successful in at least one area of her life. And even though she's that old, when I told her I wasn't going to reschedule with her, she protested even more, even getting belligerent, saying that I should understand that her time is valuable and she has a busy schedule. And I said, well, yeah, but you should understand that about me as well. You've already just wasted my time. So for those same reasons, I can't give you a chance to do it again. Like, how does that not make sense to someone who's so much older and more successful than me? And her response was just more belligerence, saying that I'm not a real man. And I quote, that a real man would realize that she's busy and her time is valuable. Such a hypocritical contradiction, since she was treating me like my time wasn't. And here I am getting crazy text messages from a woman who is more than a decade my senior, much more successful than I, and thus someone who I thought would be very sophisticated and intelligent and conscientious, and socially mature, and yet she was acting like an emotionally and mentally unwell teenage girl. And that is the moment I realized that physical age has very little to do with sexual maturity and the ability for a woman to know what she wants sexually enough to give consent for it. That this woman settling down with the first guy she ever loved as a teenager confined her to a bubble for her entire life and caused her to never grow up in certain ways, socially and sexually. And since she had never actually dated, she had never developed the kind of social intelligence, emotional maturity and intelligence, and sexual maturity and intelligence that comes with the experience of dating. In essence, she was still a 16-year-old girl mentally in all of these ways. And you cannot fuck a woman who's in her 40s physically in body, but who never grew up mentally and is still a adolescent in her mind. That would be like fucking a retard. I mean, that basically is the definition of what a retard is. And as we know already, you cannot fuck a retard. In fact, consent is so relative that even when a woman is trying to have sex with you, telling you with both her words and her body that she wants to, that she can later revoke it and say that you actually raped her. This is common in this day and age, especially in certain circumstances, such as if she is intoxicated, if she has a boyfriend who she is cheating on, or if you have lied to her about how much money you make, or set up some sort of false expectations for her that you then disappoint her about. A woman can claim that her decision-making was impaired in those circumstances, or that you did something to cause her to make the wrong decision by being deceitful, which is similar to fraud. And if you have ever dated a woman long-term, you know that they are constantly doing this. They're constantly being deceitful. They're constantly changing their minds and flip-flopping, contradicting themselves, saying one thing and then doing another. So how can we ever really trust a woman's decision-making skills or her word? And can we ever? I mean, as we know from the last video, we can't trust a woman's word because it's basically meaningless. And that is why we have this issue with women giving their consent. And some women will simply revoke consent after the fact just because they didn't have a good time. And, it wasn't as good as they thought it was going to be. They feel like it wasn't worth it. And it felt as though you were a bad lay. Which most people are, because most people don't want to talk about sex in a constructive way, about things such as consent and how both people can work together to make it a good thing. No, people don't want to do that. They just want to go through the motions, oftentimes in ways that aren't very conscious or sober. So because of all this, many of you men are at risk, even with a girl who gives you her consent. Because if it ends up not being good enough to her and she regrets it, then she will revoke her consent after the fact. So if you're selfish in sex and just bend a girl over and fuck her roughly and get your rocks off and then be done with it without a care for her pleasure, you very well may have just made her feel taken advantage of and mistreated sexually, which can lead her to regretting sex and feeling as though it was more akin to rape and something she could and may very well charge you with. So in conclusion, consent is obviously a very relative thing because all countries and states don't agree upon the age a woman should be able to legally consent. And as for us men, men's consent doesn't even really matter legally either, as it seems. We are just open and vulnerable to being sexually assaulted by a woman who then can revoke her consent to have even had sex with us, even though she was the one doing it. She can then accuse us of raping her. So it doesn't really matter that the law says a woman can give her consent after this certain age, and the women you are going for are past that age. Even if a woman is of the age of consent, even if she seems she wants to fuck you and is telling you as much, that is not enough to protect you from rape allegations. So in the next video, I'm going to be going over some of the practical measures you can take in order to ensure that you never fall prey to a woman claiming that she had sex with you and it wasn't actually consensual when in fact it was. Or you could just do what I do, go your own way and avoid women entirely, sexually and otherwise. But that concludes this talk. I hope I mansplained that well enough for you guys out there. Thank you for listening. Be sure to share your own thoughts and opinions about the relative and arbitrary nature of consent and false rape allegations by commenting below. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and share these messages with everyone by sharing the video on social media and talking about these things too. And lastly, check out the links in the description below for other resources for your masculine personal development and living the life you want to as an independent man. And if you can afford to donate, please do so with the PayPal link below because your support funds me doing this work and fighting the good fight for men like you. And you can stay tuned for the next video coming out soon, which will be on protecting yourself against false rape allegations. And make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified when that is. And until then, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.